Hi, I'm Dennis from Pathmaker, and today we'll be covering another controversial topic. Now, the biblical topics from Pathmaker typically fall into two categories. One being discipleship, because it was a command from Jesus, and secondly, a warning to Christians of the yeast of the Pharisees. Now, what does that mean? It refers to Jesus warning his disciples to stay away from traditions that are ungodly or unbiblical. If you like the content from Pathmaker, feel free to slam that like button and subscribe to this channel for future videos. Today's topic will reference what the Bible has to say about the failure of religious leaders. Now, for clarification, not all religious leaders are bad people. This discussion will focus on the very few terrible ones that were discovered through careful research. Now, this may be a sacred cow for many in the Christian culture. You may not like to talk about pastors or issues regarding pastors. So if you are so emotionally bent on this issue and refuse to do any research or understand what the Bible has to say about the subject, I advise that you not watch this video until you're ready. So obviously the reports of Christian leaders in the news is at an alarming rate. Many caught in scandals rock the church and also rock the credibility of the church. Now, these issues involving the very thing the Bible is warning us against. Something to keep in mind is that, this problem affects both Christians in both organizations of the Catholics and the Protestants. So we have the umbrella of Christianity, and we have the Catholics and the Protestants, and we know it affects both groups. But in the past, we do know, because of records and court cases and news reports, as well as individual admissions and from the Catholic Church itself, that there has been some deep problems with priest and pedophilia. So we know that's an issue because it's already been established, but that's not something we're going to rehash here. I'm going to focus a little more on the other side, on the Protestant side, because there are some issues that have come about over the past few decades. It is alarming what's going on in the Protestant Church with spiritual leaders, and it's something that really needs to be discussed. So, let's start with some of the data. Some of the data that has been compiled, for this video, it actually is surprising. Pornography and pastors or spiritual leaders involved in pornography is at a rate of about 50%. So that's not only alarming, but it kind of shakes the ground of, wow, why are these people in the position they're in, if they can't control themselves in a moral fashion. Now that's, not 50% of all pastors. It's up to 50% being involved with some form of pornography. And that's spiritual leaders. So that not only just covers pastors, but also spiritual leaders. And that's only those that have, a lot of this, data and research is those that have admitted to it. So it's alarming. Now, between 10 and 35% of those spiritual leaders, pastors, as well as others that fill a leadership role within the church, 10 to 35% being involved in extramarital affairs, with a lot of those affairs being with people from their own congregation, females that are in that particular leadership role that they oversee. So this is alarming, but also at the same time, I was kind of surprised at the data itself. This research data was actually from the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s. So covering 30 years ago, obviously it was getting worse percentage-wise as for spiritual leaders in failing. It hasn't gotten better. So obviously this is an issue that needs to be discussed amongst the church leaders or church congregation. So I know this may be a very sensitive subject and a taboo to discuss, but just remember, I'm just a messenger. Please don't, get mad at me for, presenting this to you, presenting this data. I'm just, somebody that is coming to fellow Christians and saying, hey, this is a problem within the church that needs to be talked about, and it's a topic. So, a lot of times when it comes to issues like this of church leaders acting immorally, how does it come to this? Well, there are many of these cases involve being in a position of leadership and then taking advantage of people that are vulnerable. So, how does that happen? And biblically, how does that relate biblically? Well, biblically, you can actually see what unfolded with, King David in the Old Testament in his relationship with Bathsheba, and he slept with her, got her pregnant when she was married to, one of David's soldiers, and later leading to David having that soldier killed, or he murdered him, not with his own hands, but he allowed it to take place. So, we see that in somebody as popular in the scriptures as King David, it happening to him, as well as in the New Testament. We have, in 1 Corinthians 5:1, we have the Apostle Paul who's criticizing a man in the church who is sleeping with his stepmother. So, and then he was very open about it. So at least the man who was sleeping with his stepmother was open about it. And here's Paul criticizing him for it. So we know that these things do happen, and biblically, it's unfolding. It unfolds in the scriptures as well. So, is it a problem that should be discussed? Yes, definitely. So I wanted to kind of look into what scriptures would relate to a subject like this. Somebody who's in a spiritual leadership and, their behavior. So the one that I thought of, the one that came up, was Eli. Now, if you know a little bit about Eli, Eli was one of the 12 judges of Israel. Now, there was a time when, Israel, before they had a king, before they had King Saul and King David and then the line of kings to follow after them, they had what was called judges. And why did they have judges? Well, they had judges because there were periods in Israel's history where they would fall out of favor with God. And a lot of the times it was because of their behavior. They would fall into sins. They would do things like, marry into different cultures and then start worshiping that culture's gods. And, that's breaking one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not have any other gods. So what would happen is God would allow like a reigning kingdom or country come in and ransack Israel, kill their people or take their stuff, and then they would get humbled and basically be in the dirt, throwing, ashes and dirt on their head, asking God for forgiveness. Now, when they would do that, God would raise up a judge, and typically a judge was a military leader, a warrior, as well as a priest, who would, after he annihilated the kingdom or country that was harming Israel, he would help restore Israel, as well as through that priestly behavior, help restore Israel's attitude towards God. So Eli was one of those judges. There was only 12, and he was a very well-respected man. Now, Eli had two sons. His two sons were named Hophni and Phinehas. And these two guys were also priests. Now, they were priests at the tabernacle. If you know a little bit about the tabernacle, it was actually a very large tent that they used to worship God, and it was a residing place for God. Before the temple of Israel was built, they used the tabernacle. So Eli's two sons were priests at the tabernacle. Now, some reports were coming back to Eli that his two sons were called wicked and just two wicked guys. And not only called wicked, but also scoundrels. And why were these godly people, or these people of God, calling Eli's two sons this? Well, it was found out that Eli's sons were not only sleeping with some of the servant girls that served at the tabernacle, because these men were married and they were having extramarital affairs with these servants. They were also reported to be stealing some of the sacrifices that were supposed to be given to God. So they were stealing, they were having extramarital affairs, and then in some Bible translations it says that they were involved in the murder of other people. So obviously these are all bad behaviors for a priest who's supposed to be acting moral. It was also predicted to Eli, because Eli wouldn't tell his sons what they were doing was wrong, or he would not remove them from the position of priests. Eli was told that his two sons would die on the same day. Now, if you read along in the book of Samuel in chapter 2, and then in chapter 4, in chapter 4 you see Samuel. He's an elderly man in his 90s, blind, and he was actually waiting for his two sons to return from this battle. And what had happened in the battle was the Israelites, I guess, were losing, and they pulled back, and the enemy overtook and actually killed both of Eli's son on the same day. So a Benjaminite soldier had returned from the battlefield and had seen Eli and reported to Eli that his sons were killed. And Eli was so upset about this, this poor 90-plus-year-old blind guy, hearing the death of his two sons, was so upset about it, he fell back in his chair, and that caused him to break his neck, and he died also on the same day. So a lot of this unfolded and was predicted. So why do I bring up Eli and his two wicked scoundrel sons? Well, there is a correlation here with priestly behavior, or in that role of spiritual leader, and not acting immoral. Obviously this was a severe case where these two individuals were killed for their behavior, as well as a respected judge, but by the name of Eli. Wasn't killed in battle, but died because of the result of what he didn't do, what he not warning his sons or removing his sons from those positions. But nonetheless, why? Why bring up that subject? Well, it really comes down to behavior. Should spiritual leaders behave this way? Obviously, it's a no. And there's consequences to that. So we have a record number of pastors or spiritual leaders that are failing miserably. And why would I want to bring an issue up like this? Well, because it's pretty serious, and it's not something that I take lightly. As I explained in the past videos, I'm a doctoral researcher, so of course I'm going to gather research data, before I say anything. I want to make sure it's factual. And this data is the reason why it's alarming to me is that it's covering a 30-year period, and the span of 30 years, and it got worse through time. So, here today, it's probably not any better. And then with some of the reports that you see in the news, and what's unfolding in modern times when it comes to spiritual leaders, there's still a lot of scandals going on and spiritual leaders failing. Some of you may ask, why is it getting worse? For any good organization, it must have a good foundation. Because if that foundation is not solid, strong, or durable, eventually it's going to collapse. And that's kind of what we see happening today. We don't have a very good foundation and things are happening. How can this problem be fixed? I'm a doctoral researcher focused on organizational understandings. How do organizations work? So I study organizations as a researcher, and I understand some of the principles behind organizations, of having a good foundation. So how does this particular problem get fixed with pastors, acting the way they do in their organization? I'll actually be putting that information out in a separate video. and it'll be under the title of Is the Corporate Church Unbiblical? That video there will cover kind of more an extensive, give you an extended understanding of the pastor's role and how the church is supposed to operate in a biblical fashion. So that will come out in our next teaching. Some of you who've watched this video may be in shock, and it is alarming, the data, some of the stuff I put forward. But one of the things I would ask you not to do is, please don't go to your church and look at your pastor as a pedophile or a wicked scoundrel like Eli's sons. You have to keep in mind that there's a percentage of pastors that act like this. A lot of the pastors that I know or have run into are very good men. They love the Lord and they serve Him. But this is an alarming issue that needs to be addressed. But I would ask that you pray for your pastor and pray for your church, because there's a lot going on in these different organizations, and they need your support specifically in prayer. If you feel like maybe your pastor is struggling in these areas, or maybe there's some issues pertaining, even more you should pray for them. But I would ask that you specifically pray that they understand how to act, how to behave in a godly fashion that's biblical. Now, I appreciate sharing this content with you. If you like our video, please feel free to share it with maybe Christians that would like to know more about this growing problem in the church. I also ask that you not forget to crush that like button and help us reach out to the world of subscribers out there. Thanks for watching today. God bless you, and I hope to join you in the next video session.